People might not imagine how great the threat to one's life can be. The Washington Post revealed today how Trump used 007 tactics to evade a potential assassination in Turkey. So today, I'm bringing you this news story. Also, New York Mayor Mandani wanted to raise and spend money for socialist causes, but was blocked by a judge. What happened? What will happen next? Additionally, today is primary day in several states. In Wisconsin, a socialist warrior might emerge to run for governor. She's an Asian woman. Who is she? And what exactly are her main policy positions? Welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and our listeners on Silicon Valley FM 96.1. First, let's talk about the major earthquake in Colombia. Yesterday, a magnitude 7.4 quake hit western Colombia. So far, at least 164 are dead, 570 injured, and over 1,500 buildings damaged. Colombia's geological agency stated this is the strongest earthquake recorded in the country so far this century. Volunteers and emergency responders nationwide are now racing against time to rescue people trapped under the rubble. Authorities warn that the death toll is likely to climb even further. President Esprella, in office for just 3 days, declared a national state of emergency and sent troops to the disaster zone, vowing that Colombia will overcome this together. Several cities are severely affected. Building walls and floors are twisted at irregular angles, and power lines are scattered all over the roads. In Cali, 200 kilometers from the epicenter, with 2.2 million people, the casualties are worst, with at least 85 dead. But near the epicenter in San Jose del Palmar, Choco province, northwest Colombia, despite damaged access roads, there were miraculously no deaths or injuries reported. The U.S. Geological Survey stated this large-scale earthquake occurred at 7:34 on August 10th, with a focal depth of 107 kilometers. And, as mentioned, Colombia's geological agency confirmed this is the strongest earthquake since the start of the 21st century. Seismologist Vanderlee from Northwestern University said that although the depth exceeded 100 kilometers, the intensity, inland location, and strike-slip movement were all quite extraordinary. Normally, such a deep quake shouldn't cause such intense surface shaking, but this one did, worsening the disaster in densely populated areas. Well, let's hope the rescue efforts for those trapped there go smoothly. All right, let's talk about how Trump escaped a deadly threat today like a cicada shedding its skin. President Trump flew to Ankara, the capital of Turkey, from July 7th to 8th this year for the NATO summit, as we all remember. But then, a little-known drama of a great escape unfolded. What exactly happened? Well, Ankara is actually only 1,100 kilometers from Iran's northwestern border, about the same distance as Israel, just a bit further. So this was actually Trump, as the President of the United States, entering a dangerous area. This is the closest President Trump has been to Iran since the war began on February 28th. In Iran's arsenal, there are 4 types of medium-range missiles that can reach Ankara, including their Shahed 136 drones, which can also hit Ankara. So the president's schedule for the NATO summit was public, including where he stayed. It was like being out in the open while the enemy was in the shadows. How to get in and out safely was a critical security challenge. First, on July 7th, President Trump flew to the Turkish capital on the new Air Force One, a gift from the King of Qatar for the NATO summit. It lasted a day and a half, and he flew out on the night of July 8th. But when he left, he took the old Air Force One. This caused a media stir. People wondered if there was an assassination threat. Why fly in on the new one but leave on the old one? Was the new one not fully equipped? The White House denied it. And what did Trump say? He said he just wanted to do it for old time's sake. You know, to be nostalgic and fly on his old plane one last time before he couldn't anymore. Also, he said he wanted to fly the new plane to the UK so the U.S. military personnel stationed there could take a look. He wanted everyone to see both planes. That was the idea. But the media generally believed it was because President Trump's security detail, the U.S. Secret Service, advised him not to take the new plane when leaving Turkey. Given the threat from Iran, the new plane's electronic countermeasures and its ability to evade or counter Iranian missiles weren't ready yet, so it wasn't as safe as the old one. And officials also said it wasn't due to any specific imminent threat, but rather out of extreme caution. Okay, so that's what we've known up until now. But is that the whole truth? Yes, but also no, because it wasn't just extreme caution. It really looks now like there was a substantial threat at the time. Why is that? Because the evasive actions President Trump took went far beyond just switching planes. So, what actually happened? Just after 8 p.m. on the evening of July 8th, President Trump arrived at the Ankara airport and boarded Air Force One, the old one we mentioned. He went on first, and then the press corps followed, boarding one by one. As you know, there are dozens of people in the press corps. And then, after boarding, an announcement was made on the plane. Everyone had to pull down the window shades, and no one was allowed to look outside. So in other words, you couldn't see in from the outside either. As it turned out, 6 minutes later, a catering truck drove up to the old Air Force One, and then it rose up. You know, the truck lifted up to the cabin door. And of course, what was the truck there for? To deliver food, right? That's what everyone thought. But after aligning with the cabin door, the one who slipped out of the plane was President Trump. He slipped out of the plane and into the catering truck, which then lowered back down and drove to a military aircraft over 100 meters away. It was also a modified Boeing 747 used by the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel's C-32A. In other words, everyone thought President Trump was on the old Air Force One, but without anyone knowing, he had already switched to the plane next to it. Then the new Air Force One took off first, flying to a U.S. Air Force base in the U.K. called Mildenhall. Mildenhall. A few hours later, the C-32A arrived. After the C-32A arrived, the old Air Force One landed just a few minutes later. Then, President Trump got back into the catering truck from the C-32A and was driven to the old Air Force One. The truck lifted him up, he slipped back in through the cabin door, and then he officially walked down the stairs of the old Air Force One. So, in other words, the old Air Force One was acting as a decoy. And the ones helping President Trump with the cover-up were a group of White House officials, plus the entire press corps. They all became decoys, really. Anyway, so you can see the scale of this evasive maneuver by the Secret Service. It was a massive operation with incredibly high risks. Then, after Trump landed in the UK, he greeted the American troops. Okay, and then they departed from the airbase again. All three planes flew back to the U.S., away from danger. Once they were out of danger, on the way back to the U.S., Trump invited everyone to board the new Air Force One, and he got on as well. Okay, and that's when he came over to chat. You know, on the flight from Turkey to the UK, even though Trump was on board, none of the reporters remember him, Trump, coming to talk to him. Why? Because he had taken the catering truck to another plane entirely, so of course he couldn't talk to him. But now, on Air Force One, flying from the UK to Washington, Trump was chatting with the reporters. Two things. First, Trump didn't say a single word about the switch that had just taken place. But he did reveal something when a reporter asked him, "After you had us board in Turkey, why did we have to keep the window shades down?" Trump said, "That's because you might have been on a dangerous flight, because we have to deal with those scumbags." He said, "I've always been in mortal danger, ranking #1 on Iran's assassination list." He said, "But if I die, you guys have to die too." Trump said, "Maybe one day you'll want to change jobs." Right? This is very interesting. Trump, he's telling the truth here. If I'm in danger, you traveling reporters are in danger too. Maybe you won't want this job anymore. Should you change jobs later? Right, so this is the story. This story just came out today and has been confirmed by multiple media outlets. It seems to be true. It was, of course, leaked by White House officials. Whether it was a legal or illegal leak, we just don't know. But this matter, the story I'm telling, is a fact. So my brief comment is, how dangerous is it to be the president of the United States? How dangerous is it for Trump? And then, how dangerous is it to be a White House reporter? Even if you attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner, someone might rush in with a gun. This is what you call a close call. Then, traveling abroad, to the Middle East, as a traveling reporter, you face the same danger as Trump. Does anyone have any thoughts or reflections? Feel free to leave a comment. Now, the next news is still quite critical. It's called U.S. military ammunition shortage threatening the security of the Asia Pacific, or Asia Pacific security is under threat. So recently, regarding the U.S. hostilities with Iran, why was there a ceasefire? One reason is that defensive weapons are almost exhausted. Defensive weapons, you see. Why is that? Because for 25 years, the number of critical missile defense interceptors purchased by the U.S. has been relatively limited, and now we're seeing the consequences. Okay, so we all know the U.S. military relies on high-precision defensive missiles to form its air defense system to protect Israel, U.S. troops in the Middle East, and what are called naval vessels in the Red Sea, as well as the aircraft carrier strike groups in the Arabian Sea. And of course, that includes protecting Middle Eastern countries. There are mainly two types. One is the Patriot 3 that we all know, which is for short-range protection, protecting against things right in front of you, mainly targeting cruise missiles. Cruise missiles are like drones. They fly close to the ground. Then there's another type called ballistic missiles, which come crashing down from the sky, from outer space, and then straight down. So for ballistic missiles, you need to use these long-range defensive missiles. This is what we know as the THAAD system, THAAD interceptors. In the brief 5-month conflict with Iran, the U.S. military has seen two outcomes. It has used up almost all of its ATACMS and precision strike missiles, which are offensive missiles. At the same time, it has also heavily consumed America's Patriot and THAA interceptors. So how long will it take to rebuild these missile stockpiles? It's not just working harder for a few months, it'll take years, a bit like rare earths. Why is that? Because it's not just a problem today. Because this debate over how many interceptors and how much ammunition the U.S. should purchase has been going on for 25 years, starting right after 9/11. This is what Jim Fain, a researcher in defense studies, defense industry at the Heritage Foundation, told the media. He said that ultimately in the congressional debates, when the budget trade-offs were made, the side advocating for buying fewer interceptor missiles won out. So as you know, in 2022, the United States procurement of Patriot 3 missiles was 328 units. By 2023, it dropped to 252. By 2024, it fell to 230, and by 2025, it was down to 214. It wasn't until Trump took office that it was significantly increased, right? He started demanding more funding to provide more of these Patriot 3 missiles, and of course all other types of missiles as well. The core issue now isn't the Middle East. It's what happens if a long-term military conflict breaks out with a near-peer adversary like the Chinese Communist Party. Then the United States would have no defense. The Heritage Foundation in the United States released a report saying that if a war were fought with the Chinese Communist Party, the United States would need at least 7,000 Patriot 3 missiles and 1,400 THAAD interceptors. This is the minimum viable inventory to fight such a war. Now, this is several times the current United States inventory. As for what the actual United States stockpile is, nobody knows right now, as it's a military secret. But what do we know? What we know is that Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer, has an annual production capacity of only 620 Patriot 3 missiles. And for THAAD interceptors, it's only 96, not even 100. Okay, so how did Trump address this issue? In the 2026 fiscal budget, the total missile procurement quantity proposed by the Army Requirements Oversight Council was increased from 3,376 per year to 13,773. Trump increased it fourfold. Now, of course, if defense contractors like Lockheed Martin don't increase production capacity, it would take 80 to 90 years to acquire all these items. So the United States arms industry needs to scale up rapidly, otherwise it just won't work. So let's say it again. The war against Iran is actually an encounter battle, decided in haste, triggered by the protests of the Iranian people and the subsequent massacre of a people by the Iranian authorities. So United States ammunition wasn't fully prepared. And this kind of war used to be a quick resolution, but now that it's turned into sustained bombing, it's putting significant pressure on United States military ammunition. Therefore, it does indeed pose a threat to operations in the Taiwan Strait. So now both China and the United States are wary and cautious of each other. On Xi Jinping's side, he's got his military in a state of total disarray, so he doesn't dare to act lightly. And on the United States side, because of the war in Iran, ammunition is being consumed in large quantities, so the United States military is currently in a difficult period. So both sides need time. This is why China and the US are kicking each other under the table right now, but not openly clashing because both sides need time. Okay, let's look at this new policy from Mamdani, the New York wealth tax, which has been blocked by a judge. We reported a while ago that the socialist New York mayor Mamdani, to support his socialist welfare policies like the so-called supply and marketing cooperatives or free buses and so on, needed to find money for him. To balance the New York City budget, he introduced his so-called second luxury home surtax plan. This applies to single-family homes or small townhouses in New York City with 1 to 3 units, at most 3. Those large apartment complexes don't count. If the market value is over $5 million and it's a second home, then a new real estate surtax can be added. After this policy came out, the names, addresses, and property values of owners of over 900,000 homes were suddenly published online. Well, many of them didn't even fit the so-called second luxury home criteria. Many were just primary luxury homes, primary residences. So 3 New York homeowners took the matter to court. The plaintiff said the New York City government should have first determined if these properties were actually taxable, instead of just publishing everything at once. Over 900,000 homes. It left New Yorkers scrambling to prove their homes were primary residences, not second homes. So the plaintiff's lawyers said officials didn't use existing information to determine which properties truly qualified. Basically, they didn't do their homework, which caused chaos and a public backlash. He said it's ridiculous, it's wrong, and it led to these homeowners being doxxed. Furthermore, the notices sent to these homeowners were threatening because they threatened them with a surtax, even though the work of clearly verifying each individual's taxability was never done. So the plaintiff's lawyer slammed the way the government implemented this tax, calling the situation extraordinary, the notices bizarre, and the publication of the property list absurd. He said thousands of New Yorkers are now on edge and urged the judge to halt Mayor Mamdani's policy. As it turns out, the judge agreed today and halted Mamdani's so-called second luxury home tax plan, ordering New York City to take down the list from the internet. Now, let me offer a comment. Mamdani needs money to run his socialism, right? What is socialism? Socialism is spending all of other people's money. He needs money because the government has none. The government don't produce or innovate, so where would it get money? It has to take it from the rich. But raising income tax in New York is unpopular, and the governor isn't willing, so he doesn't have that money. Another option is to borrow, but that's blocked by New York law. New York mandates that budgets from the state to the city governments can't exceed their limits. Okay, so you can't go into debt to provide welfare. If your budget exceeds your spending, exceeds your income, the law says you can't do it. You must balance your budget. So what New York City can control now is property taxes, but the city council won't let those pass either. There are some complex factors involved here that I won't get into. So in the end, what does Mamdani do? What does he do without money? He finally went to the governor, Governor Hochul, and they worked out this thing for New York City called a second home tax for the wealthy. His point is that these rich people aren't New York City residents anyway, so it's okay to offend them. But they have money, so if we tax those homes, we'll have the money for my public cooperatives, my free childcare, and so on. So yeah, Hochul was convinced by him. Hochul obviously didn't dare raise income taxes, but for this very specific tax, she felt it wouldn't offend New Yorkers or New York voters. She thought these special real estate surtaxes were worth a try. So it passed at the state level, approved by the state legislature, and signed by the governor. It authorized New York City to levy a surtax on these so-called second luxury homes. But now, boom, it's been blocked by the court. Now, of course, this block doesn't mean the second luxury home tax is illegal since the state legislature passed it. It's that the execution was wrong, so crude, just throwing it out there. It's like threatening the wealthy, threatening these homeowners. How can you do that? It's just unacceptable. The judge was also very firm in the ruling, saying that although the bell has already been rung and I can't make it quiet, at least I can mitigate the damage. So you can't do it this way. Of course, since it's not illegal, Mamdani will keep pushing it forward. Anyway, let me add a comment here. I think the current American system, including New York State and New York City, imposes very strong fiscal constraints. So it's not that easy for Mamdani to financially bankrupt New York, right? He faces all sorts of constraints. Okay, next let's look at today's, it's Tuesday again. These are the midterm primary elections with 6 states voting today. Alabama, Connecticut, Minnesota, South Carolina, Vermont, and Wisconsin. This is Tuesday, August 11th. So what are the main things to watch? I'll go over 3 key points with you. First, the biggest core issue is the ideological struggle within the Democratic Party between the so-called progressive wing and the establishment. Second is President Trump's grip on the Republican Party and whether his endorsed candidates can win. He's backed a very unique candidate in Minnesota, which I'll tell you about in a bit. Okay, back to the Democrats and their ideological battle. It started with Mamdani in New York in the congressional primaries there, then to Plattner in Maine, whom I mentioned a couple of days ago, then to El Sayed in Michigan, and now to today's decisive vote. What's the main battleground? Who is it? It's the Democratic primary for governor in Wisconsin. So this key figure, the star figure, is from the Socialist Party. Her name is Francisca Hung. Everyone, take a look. It's different. She's up against an establishment candidate named David Crowley. Now, Crowley is endorsed by the current Democratic governor, Tony Evers. So this is a very typical case of a moderate versus a, let's say, permissive or progressive, though I don't like using the word progressive. It's a showdown between them. Ms. Hung, she's focusing on affordable housing, using that to energize the far left base. But the establishment is worried that in the general election, if you win the primary and become our candidate, you won't be able to beat the Republican frontrunner, Tammy Tiffany. Tammy Tiffany is the, how should I put it, the frontrunner for the Republican gubernatorial nomination in Wisconsin. So this is the most watched election battle today. Okay, so this Ms. Hong, I should tell you a bit about her. Who is she exactly? She's a socialist with a background in the restaurant industry. She's Korean American. You see the name Hong, but she's not Chinese. She's Korean American. She's also the first Asian American member of the Wisconsin State Legislature. She used to be a chef, then a restaurant owner. She ran a ramen shop. I was wondering if it was Korean or ultimately Chinese. I'm not sure. She was also a bartender, which sounds a lot like AOC. She's a classic grassroots figure from the restaurant service industry, and that's become her persona as a voice for the working class. So the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, specifically look for people like that. Well, in 2020, she was elected to the Wisconsin State Assembly, representing a district in Madison. Madison is a large community in Wisconsin, and she has close ties to the DSA. What does she advocate for? What has she said in the past? She said Thanksgiving celebrates colonialism, and she advocates for defunding and eventually abolishing the police, as well as abolishing ICE and even the Senate. So now that she's running for governor, she's walking all of that back. She says, oh, those were just aspirational goals. Aspirational goals, not her actual policy platform for governing. Regardless, those views of hers have already been exposed. In the election, she's focusing on affordability, and it's proven to be very effective. One of her proposals that unexpectedly went viral is to issue a moratorium on AI data centers, which are being built rapidly all across the country. She believes they erode livelihoods and compete with the people for resources. That's her stance. She even gave it a very internet-savvy name, Control-Alt-Delete, like restarting or resetting a PC. Her handling of this issue has been surprisingly effective in Wisconsin. Opposition to AI data centers among Wisconsin Democrats has jumped from 56% to 88%, becoming a major factor that could help her win today's Democratic primary. You know, every state is fighting for these data centers because they bring in so much investment, right? They create a lot of jobs. Yeah, she's dead set against them, and she still manages to win over voters. So tonight, there's a good chance, a real possibility, that she'll win the Democratic primary. This would mean a self described socialist candidate reaching an unprecedented level once again. We all remember Abdul El Sayed in Michigan. What did he win back then? He won a state Senate seat, which was a statewide race. Now, Francisco Hong is running at the state level too, but she's actually gunning for the governorship. But the real question is, even if she wins the primary, can she win on November 3rd? Can she win the general election? See, Wisconsin is your classic purple swing state. Her opponent is the current Republican frontrunner, Tom Tiffany. Now, Tiffany's already raised $15 million. He's got deep pockets and a strong endorsement from Trump. Right, he comes from a Tea Party background, and he's currently a United States representative. So the Democratic establishment is worried. They're saying you're a self-proclaimed socialist candidate and you're just too far left for a statewide race. If she scares off moderate voters, they'll end up handing the governorship to the Republicans. Since the current governor is a Democrat, they're doing everything they can to hold her back, to keep her from winning the primary and potentially ruining their chances in the general. But these progressives argue that her focus on affordability and populist issues like opposing data centers is exactly what resonates with ordinary voters struggling with the cost of living. They don't see it as a weakness. They think it might actually help them beat the Republicans. So what's your take? We're discussing whether a socialist can actually beat a Republican in a midterm election. Let's run a quick poll, shall we? Everyone, tell us how you're feeling about this, okay? Can a socialist really defeat a Republican in the midterms? We know that socialists beating Democrats is becoming quite common now. It's happening all over the place. But can they actually beat a Republican? That's a major question facing the country right now.